So they've had Republican Party spokesman Glenn Beck, Sarah Palin, everybody else demonize the birthers because they're really worried about more than half Republicans in polls questioning his birth certificate. At the same time, they're not having success demonizing the American people and folks that are identifying the New World Order. They're openly announcing world government, but then calling it a conspiracy theory if we don't like it and don't want an unelected tyrannical world government ruling our lives. And so if you go back to Oklahoma City and other events, the government clearly orchestrated and provocateured that event. Paul Watson has an article that breaks all of this down that is up on prisonplanet.com. It's titled Southern Poverty Law Center Report. Heavy on smear, thin on facts. And it goes into the government documents and mainstream news articles about the FBI being in Oklahoma City, sworn federal affidavits that they were running McVeigh, that he was a federal officer. It's all in here. So I can tell you politically that I am seeing the media put out the talking point through right-wing and left-wing establishment news channels, predominantly cable news. And we have Cass Sunstein, the White House regulations are saying we can provocateur events, criminal events, and blame it on our political opposition. And there's no way they're going to be able to make everybody feel sorry for the government and have the pretext for the police state and to openly roll out Homeland Security against conservatives and libertarians and gun owners that their internal reports say they're really set up for. That's their main mission. There's no way they're going to get away with this without staging events in this country against IRS buildings, against government buildings, against capitals, state capitals, federal capital in D.C., against the military. So the government can feel sorry for itself and believe there's a real threat out there and then demonize the Patriot movement. Because the Patriot movement that's been around for decades has been right about the world government, did their research, understand the threat we're facing. And, folks, there's all these neocon publications that are attacking me. I mean, the big GOP news site did it. Cliff Kincaid, who, by the way, I want to get on and debate this guy, demonizing Oath Keepers as extremists when they're milquetoast. I mean, they just call for following their oath. It's incredible. And you see top Republican strategists. In fact, here's the Politico headline. Conservatives target their own fringe. So you've got Glenn Beck and Chris Matthews on some shows we've played clips of here mirroring the exact talking points because the Republicans and Democrats work for the same big establishment. And it's their job to create the illusion of choice and to manage the public. Now, I want to play a few minutes of this MSNBC report with Potok of the Southern Slime Center demonizing people. And in their report, again, mainline Republican congressmen are demonized. Mainline Americans, just mainline. You criticize anything the government's doing, you may be a dangerous terrorist. So let's go ahead and play this clip.
It says right-wing extremist groups have gained even more support in the USA over the last year, fueled in part by anger over the troubled economy, the nation's first black president, and immigration issues. It's raising concerns over a potential rise in anti-government violence, like that deadly attack on an IRS building in Texas last week. I'm joined by Mark Potok of the Southern Poverty Law Center, the author of the annual report, Rage on the Right. What stands out to you this year in terms of these groups who are truly angry at the way they see the government acting?
Really what stands out the most is just the scope of the thing. I mean, there has been an enormous growth in groups on the radical right of all kinds in the last year. You know, when we look at the whole picture, though, the most astounding growth has come in the so-called patriot groups, the militias that all of us remember from the 1990s. You know, these groups had very largely, if not disappeared, at least gone quiescent. But what we found was 363 new groups in the last year. That's a 240% 44% increase
in
a single year. And at the same time, we saw a lot of growth in other types
Americans
of
are getting upset. How dare them? Oh,
patriot groups. I mean, are these just
as they show a smoking IRS building?
What is it about them that concerns you in terms of the threat they represent?
Because he's high up on the mountain and he tells us what to do.
Well, the self-named patriot movement is really the movement of which the paramilitary wing was the militias. So, you know, basically the patriot movement is a movement that sees the federal government as its primary enemy. And
by the way, our whole country's going bankrupt. There's 30 million illegal aliens. He says you're evil if you don't want open borders.
And so on.
But Mexico will arrest you for no reason.
It may sound like a benign set of beliefs. The reality is that the patriot movement back in the 1990s produced an enormous amount of criminal violence, all kinds of plots and so on.
Oh, really?
All based on these
Southern Poverty Law Centers and federal documents
about what the government was up to. Joseph Stack, the man who flew the plane into the IRS building in Austin, is an example of those kinds of beliefs. Many so-called patriots believe that the federal income tax is completely unconstitutional, illegal.
We didn't have it until 1913. We built our whole country without it. Most Americans didn't pay it until the 1950s. It goes to offshore banks on interest on imaginary debt. For our country to create money, debt is created to private banks. And that's all this guy is. Oh, you don't want foreign banks ruling you? You're an extremist. Continue.
Investigators
produced a lot of havoc.
You know, the investigators in that case, Mark, characterized that as criminal activity. But what we saw in the 1990s with Timothy McVeigh and what happened in Oklahoma City at the Murrah Federal Building was very similar. A vehicle being used to attack a government building because of anti-government extremism. Are you concerned about domestic terrorism? And are you concerned at the reluctance on the part of investigators to label these kinds of incidents terrorism?
Well, look, in the Joseph Stack case, one could argue about it because there's certainly evidence in both directions. Joseph Stack was a man, according to his kind of suicide note, who was angry at a lot of things, the Catholic Church, unions, corporations, and so on, but he kept circling back to the idea of it was the IRS and the government was the enemy. So am I concerned? Yes, I am concerned. We've seen a great deal of at least attempted domestic terrorism, I think an obvious rise over the last 12 to 18 months. A lot of that has been connected to the essentially the rise to the White House of a black man. There are many people who are angry about that and also angry about the demographic change that definitely is occurring in this country.
Immigration.
So, you know, yes, I worry about violence.
Okay, so there you go.
Mark,
you don't like paying for 30 million illegal aliens, basically all on welfare. All the studies show sucking more money than they put in. You don't like the police state. You don't like banks stealing trillions. You don't like losing your job. It's all because Obama's black. You're a racist. Meanwhile, the left never tells you that they fund the abortions of more than half of the black people. Less than half the blacks that are conceived are born. But let's not talk about 16 million black people killed. Let's just say, oh, you don't like the banks raping you? You don't like black people. This is a poverty pimp. This is a race baiter. This is what they do. This is how they operate. These people are sickening. And they're going to stage events. The establishment is going to stage events so they can play the part of the good guys and demonize everybody. So that's why we need to be non-violent, ladies and gentlemen. But if the CPS is dragging your kids away for no reason to their rape rooms, you defend yourself, it's called terrorism. You tell a census worker you're not going to answer all their questions that violate your Fifth Amendment, you're a terrorist. You don't like the Federal Reserve raping you, you're a terrorist. You don't like being a slave, you're a terrorist. You don't like the government ignoring the Constitution and warrantless wiretaps in the Patriot Act, you're an evil terrorist. You don't like the IRS taking your property without due process, you're a terrorist. You don't submit to everything they're saying and doing, you're a terrorist. And, you know, this ties together. I've seen a few mainstream news articles misquoting me, saying Jones says the Haiti earthquake was a government weather weapon. I mean, that's the type of stuff they're throwing at me. So I thought that I would talk a little bit about this today. In fact, I'm going to play one of the caller questions that we had come in. The first one was from Cheryl. The caller asked if Alex believes the sudden onset of earthquakes may be related to HAARP. Now, it was Hugo Chavez reportedly said he thought that could be a weather weapon. And the reason I talk about this sometimes is Secretary of Defense Cohen told Army Times in 97 they have these weapons. I don't know. Other people have been pointing out that you keep seeing lights in the skies over places that are hit, but you've got giant tectonic plates. When you walk across the floor and there's static electricity, you can shock yourself. Well, imagine giant plates are moving. The aurora borealis in the northern hemisphere is caused by the magnetic field from the mass of the Earth. So, of course, you're going to see an aurora, and this has been reported for more than 100 years. So just because they're seeing lights in the sky over Haiti or over Chile doesn't mean that these are weather weapons. And I've said it again. The news will say that I'm saying it was a weather weapon. But let's go ahead and play this lady's question. Here it is.